Hello. Just want to go over some notes today with people that are at home learning and share with you what we're going to be talking about in class today. So there's just a couple slides here. The next content that we're getting into is on cranial meninges. And so there's just a few slides here to take a look at. And so um, your bell work today, your question should have been about what are some layers of protection does the brain have? So one of the layers of protection, of course, is your skull. We just finished learning the skull bones. But outside of the skull, you have what's called cranial meninges that are layers of protection that go directly wrapped around the brain. They're actually under the skull. So if you look at this picture here, this is showing layers of the head, and it's showing this most inner part here would be the brain. Okay, so this is the brain here. There's actually gray matter and white matter. I don't care that you know that, but you've got the brain. And then just directly above the brain are three layers of meninges. I'll talk about each of those here in a second. So you've got three layers here of meninges, and then your skull. So the skull is outside of the meninge layers. And then what's outside of the skull? Well, you have skin and hair, hopefully, unless you're bald. So those are some layers of protection, and that's something that you need to know for the unit test. When we take a test, you'll need to know the layers of protection that protect the brain. So kind of going through here, we just already said that this is the skull, and I'll have you just notice that the skull is thick compared to the meninge layers. So the skull bone here is pictured, that's bone tissue, that's your skull bone. If you crack open the skull, say we were going to dissect somebody's head and you had to get through their skull, what you would find directly underneath the skull, and actually in some places attached to the skull, is the first cranial meninge, which is called the dura mater. So the dura mater literally translates into tough mother. Dura means tough. That's where we get our word durable. Dura means tough. Mater means mother, so it translates into tough mother. This is the tough mother layer. It's the first cranial meninge layer, and yes, it is kind of broken into two sub-layers, but I don't care that you know that. I want you to know the first cranial meninge layer is called the dura mater, and it is a thick, tough layer of tissue that connects directly to the skull, and underneath it is a space. So you have what's called a subdural space. Sub means below. So this is under the dura mater, and it's called the subdural space. Now, in the subdural space, if there was a brain bleed, if you were to get a bleed, sometimes blood can get trapped in this space, and it puts pressure on the brain, and that's not good, and that's called a subdural hematoma. So I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but that's kind of what's known as a brain bleed that gets trapped in there, called a subdural hematoma, and then they would have to open that up. They would have to put a shunt in there so that the blood could come out and relieve the pressure on the brain. So that's the subdural space in there between the dura mater and the next layer, and the next layer is called the arachnoid mater. It's called arachnoid if you're thinking of spiders. You're on the right track. If you look very closely here at this picture, do you see little spider webs? Did you know there were little spiders inside your brain making spider webs? Okay, not really, but this arachnoid mater is a layer of tissue. It's a little thinner than the dura mater. It is a layer of tissue, and it does have a web-like appearance. There's some tissue here. There's a network of tissue in here that has a web-like appearance, so they named it the arachnoid mater. Okay, and like the previous meninge layer, there is a subarachnoid space. So there is a space between the arachnoid mater and then the last mater, which is called the pia mater, and that's called the subarachnoid space. So the pia, there is some cerebrospinal fluid that will be naturally found occurring in there that separates the arachnoid mater from the pia mater. So the thinnest little layer of tissue directly touching the brain is called the pia mater, and that's the most deep of the tissues that are the cranial meninges, is the pia mater, and then you can see, of course, that's literally touching the brain. So this is called the cranial meninges. You have three cranial meninges: the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater, and there are spaces in between the two. or the 3 actually. So the next slide here, if it'll let me switch slides, it doesn't like to let me do that all the time. See if I can get it to go. There it goes. Okay, this is the next slide, and you have text. So this would be a good place to stop and take notes, write down some things here. This is a place to write. So it's kind of a recap of what I've said. The meninges are layers of tissue that surround the brain and spinal cord. There are space between the layers. And here is the dura mater. Translates to tough mother. Outermost layer does have arteries and veins. Then you have a space, which is really only noticeable during pathology, such as if you had a subdural hematoma and that would show up on a CAT scan. The arachnoid layer, spider web of veins and tissue. So it gets the name arachnoid for spiders, spider webs. Subarachnoid space, which contains cerebrospinal fluid. That's what that stands for. And then the pia mater, which is the innermost layer that lines the brain and the spinal cord. The spinal cord also has those 3 layers. Cerebrospinal fluid, a little bit of extra information there, protects, cushions, and nourishes the central nervous system. So really important. So that is the information about meninges. You will need to do the reading assignment and answer the questions and do your best. Hopefully you have a printer and you can print the coloring page out and you can do the coloring. If not, maybe you could, as an alternate, maybe you could sketch. Maybe you could even just sketch this image here. Would be nice. You could make a nice detailed sketch of that and then color code it. I would totally accept that, but I do want you to do something to earn some credit for that assignment. Okay, and then we'll be following up with this video.